Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Hands Down DFS. It is week 4 in the NFL, so we're going to be taking our first look at the DraftKings main slate for week 4. A little bit later than I would have preferred to get this up. It's Thursday evening. I normally like to get this up by Wednesday, but had some stuff going on, so just jotted down some initial notes this morning. Took my first look at the pricing, and based on price and matchup, just jotted down some notes of guys that stood out to me as either great value or maybe a little overvalued. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with Josh Allen here at $8,000, coming off his best game of the season so far by far against Washington. 5 touchdown game, 4 in the air, 1 on the ground, 40 points, big game. He's up $1,000 up to $8,000. I'm sure you can lock him in for at least 25 points this week because Houston just isn't good and Buffalo is just really good. So Josh Allen will be putting points on the board, and the question really comes down to, can Houston keep this remotely competitive where Josh Allen has some work to do? I think there's a realistic possibility. You see, Buffalo shut out Miami 35-0, and Miami has a much better defense than Houston does. So, can Houston keep this close? If not, and they get up 35-0, there's a real chance that Josh Allen doesn't play in the fourth quarter, or is just limited, and we'll see a lot of Singletary and Moss, which is another route you could go. 2 guys that I think are going to be cheap running back plays that should get a lot of work. Jumping down here to Russell Wilson. You see against San Francisco, they're currently ranked the 30th defense, and Russell Wilson, just the past couple seasons, has really been like the first half MVP, and he looked that way through his first 2 weeks, had big games. Last week kind of tailed off against the Vikings, and his price has come down $500 this week, $7,100, but I think this is kind of a trap spot. I think a lot of people are going to see Wilson, obviously, what he can do and against the 30th ranked defense. But the 49ers, they're not the 30th ranked defense. Let's just set that straight. They were up big in week 1 against Detroit. Just kind of took the foot off the gas and allowed Goff to put up a lot of points in garbage time. Jalen Hurts really rushed all over them in week 2. Russell Wilson doesn't quite have that same rushing upside that Hurts does, obviously. So I don't think that's going to happen. And then Rodgers in week 3 was just very mediocre against San Francisco. Had a fine game, but nothing that was going to win you a GPP, right? So Russell Wilson, I think a lot of people are going to go to him, but I think it's a trap spot right now. We'll see how ownership falls later in this week, but I expect it to be high in him, and if it is, guy I'm probably going to fade this week. One spot below, Matthew Stafford at $7,000. His price has also come up significantly, up $600 from last week. Darrell Henderson was out, but he should be back. It looked like he was a limited participant in practice this week. So I think that's going to take away from him a bit. And then going against the Cardinals, looking at who's played them so far, Tannehill in week 1 only threw 35 times. Kirk Cousins in week 2 threw 32 times. And Trevor Lawrence last week 34 times. So is Stafford capable of putting up big numbers with 35, say, attempts? Obviously, he did it last week against the Bucs, but I think the Bucs are a lot worse defensively against the pass than Arizona is. Well, at least through 3 weeks. They signed Richard Sherman. Who knows what that defense is going to look like now? I expect it to get a little bit better at the very least. But, point still stands. For QBs, we're really looking for 4x value in that 7,000. You're looking for Matthew Stafford to put up 28 or so points. So he basically has to repeat that performance he had last week and against a tougher defense. So I think that's going to be hard for him to do. So, again, that's kind of like a wait and see. If ownership's high on him, it's another guy I'm going to fade. Now at 6,900, Jalen Hurts. Going against Kansas City, who we just saw Herbert, light them up. I mean, it was a surprise win, but Kansas City's defense just has not looked very good. Chiefs will continue to allow a lot of points throughout the season, so we're going to keep targeting them. And, only to worsen the blow, 2 of their top 3 corners are either limited or did not practice Wednesday of this week. So even more reason to like Jalen Hurts, maybe get it going through the air. Obviously, he brings that great rushing upside, can get you anywhere between 30 and 80 yards on the ground. But if he can get it going through the air, kind of like he did against Dallas and have a big game, I think this is going to be another spot. He's maintained the 6,900 price level, so I think there's a lot of reasons to like Jalen Hurts this week. I think ownership is going to be high in him because this is going to be one of the highest scoring games on the slate. So he's more of a cash game play for me, but I still think he's in a great spot. Last QB I want to talk about initially is Sam Darnold down here at 6,000. A lot of people like him this week, and I think there's reason to. Obviously, he lost McCaffrey, who was always every year one of the Panthers' most targeted guys. But Hubbard still saw five targets when he came in last week, so I still think there's that safety net that Sam Darnold's going to have there. Should be able to throw with the same volume. I don't think that's going to take away from him too much, if not more, especially going against Dallas, who has the ability to put up way more points than teams like the Jets, the Saints, the Texans do. So Sam Darnold, I think we can definitely play him. Against Dallas last week, Hurts and the Eagles went down pretty big, but we just had Hurts pulled open at 6,900. So even going down multiple scores, Hurts was able to still put up 25.5 points. If you're getting 25.5 points for a guy that's 6,000, I don't think that's I think that's very playable. So yeah, I kind of like if you're going to go value at quarterback. Over to running backs, just starting out at the top, Derrick Henry. I just have a note. We just have to monitor the A.J. Brown, Julio Jones situation. Both of them are banged up, limited or non-participants in practice again. So if either one or both don't play, especially against the Jets, I mean, there's no reason to not give Derrick Henry the ball 40 times and just let this be his game. But there's always the problem when you play the Jets, right? You get up big. It's normally a slow-moving, grindy game, ugly game to watch where, the opposing team gets up by 3 scores and just runs the clock out. But the problem is I don't think they're going to want to utilize Derrick Henry in that situation where they're just trying to milk the clock. But I think the first half, Derrick Henry's a monster. In the first half, if he gets 15 touches, I'm sure he's able to put up 20 points with that. So if you want to take the risk at 8,800 to play him and hope that he can just kind of break the slate open in a half of football before it gets really grindy, slow-moving, ugly game, I say go for it. A guy I like a little bit more is Nick Chubb, who has come down pretty significantly from week 2, but also last week, down to 7,000. He's going to be just such a cheap guy at 7,000 if he sees that same volume that he saw last week, which is 22 rushes. Only got 84 yards on that, but he's throughout his career he's been a higher yards per carry average guy than that. So the Vikings are also allowing they allow the 8th highest yards per carry in 2020 at 4.6, and this year they're allowing 4.8 yards per carry so far this season, which is the 4th highest. So again, if Chubb's seeing 22 rushes for up almost 5 yards a carry, that's over 100 yards. That's a big game for him. He's a guy I like a lot this week. 6,800, Najee Harris. One of the bright spots, one of the bright rookies that we've seen so far. Him and Jamar Chase have really just kind of stood out as the two big offensive names, even more so than the quarterbacks we've seen. And really, Najee Harris has just gotten the work through the air, and that's what's made him so great. Week 2, he only saw 5 targets, but caught all 5 balls, got in the end zone. Solid 19-point game. Last week, without Deontay Johnson, 19 targets, team leading 19 targets, 14 receptions. Also had 14 carries on the ground, so touched the ball 28 times for 31 points. It's just he was on the field for 95% of snaps, and Big Ben just doesn't look like he has a strong arm this year. I mean, he's getting weak, so the ball keeps going to Najee Harris, whether it's handing the ball off to him or just checking down to him. And, to make matters worse for Green Bay, better for Najee Harris, but Green Bay has one of the best defensive backs in the league in Jair Alexander, and he should just absolutely lock down Chase Claypool. We'll see how Deontay Johnson plays out. I think he's going to play this week. He looked to be limited. He looked to be doing well. But if he doesn't, if Claypool is shut down, there's no Deontay Johnson, Najee Harris, I'm sure is going to have just as good of a game this week as he had last week. So really like him. At 6,300, Jonathan Taylor hasn't had quite the season that we've expected him to, but there was a reason he started the season priced at $8,000. He's just such a talented running back. We saw it last year, and I think he's got a good chance to get his season going, assuming he plays. You see here, he was a limited participant today, Thursday. but assuming he plays against Miami, I think this is where he gets his season going. The Colts have been playing most of their season from behind, starting the season 0-3. They can finally play with the lead maybe against Miami, who doesn't have much of an offense without Tua. I mean, honestly, even with Tua, they don't have much of an offense. But 3 straight games, Miami's been able to lock down wide receivers, and they've been beaten on the ground. And they've allowed three straight games where they just let the running backs run all over them. So I think Jonathan Taylor and even Nyheim Hines can do that again this week. At 6,200, DeAndre Swift is another guy against Chicago where it's just a matchup game script kind of play. I don't know if anyone watched Chicago and Justin Fields gets a sack 9 times, but they did not look like a good football team. They didn't look like a competent football team. The Lions have been able to put up points this year and keep games competitive, even though they're not much better. So if they do go up, I think it's going to be on the back of DeAndre Swift and TJ Hawkinson, who I'll talk about later. But I think they'll go up. I think it will be a DeAndre Swift show. Obviously, he gets a lot of work out of the backfield. We know that Detroit wide receiver core just isn't very good, and it's mostly Hawkinson and Swift getting most of the targets. So I think he's going to get a lot of more work on the ground than he's gotten through 3 weeks, and also he should maintain that volume through the air. And I just think, again, this is going to be a very safe play. I don't know if he's going to have a 30-point ceiling, but I think expecting him to get 20 to 25 points at 6,200, that's what we should expect. The last couple running backs I want to mention, 5,900 for Chuba Hubbard. Obviously with CMC out, this is the guy that's going to replace him, but I think this price is a little strange. I think it's very high of a price for a rookie that we don't know much about besides what we've seen basically last week. I mean, even week 2, he did have 8 carries, but for only 10 yards. So it's a very high price tag to pay for a guy that you don't know what you're going to get out of. Could be a GPP play if you want to go there. I'm probably going to avoid him and, just putting him on the same price level as guys like David Montgomery or Henderson if he plays, or you got Edmonds down here, Melvin Gordon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, like guys who have just had experience and have a very safe floor. I think it's a tough ask to pay $5,900 for him. And then lastly, guy I just mentioned, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. His price was corrected a little bit. Obviously, dirt cheap last week. Brought him up to $5,400. Still think that's too cheap if you're getting 17 carries a game. That's really all I'm going to say about him. I just think he's, again, too cheap. I want him around 6,000, and I think that's kind of where he belongs. But at $5,400, if he's getting 15 to 20 carries, I'm going to be playing him in cash games. Now, over to wide receivers. One of my favorite plays, guys I don't really play. I don't really play the top 3 wide receivers a lot. I just think wide receiver is the most volatile position. So why am I going to pay $8,000 for a guy? But Devontae Adams at $7,900. Best receiver in the league, probably. I mean, I don't think you would get much argument out of that. Had a great week last week with 18 targets against San Francisco, and I think he's got a very favorable matchup this week against James Pierre, who's likely to be defending him as the defensive back for Pittsburgh. He, like we saw last week, he's a guy who can get you a 40-point ceiling as a wide receiver. And I think Aaron Rodgers is finally starting to find his groove after taking a summer off and hosting some game shows. So I think Devontae Adams can have a big week. Cooper Kupp, best fantasy wide receiver, as Scotty and I have said, but $7,800. Prices come up quite a bit, right? $1,000 from last week. But the thing is, he's just got another favorable matchup against the Cardinals on the game that's the highest over-under on the slate. If ownership is going to be low on him, and by low I mean, basically anything under 15%, I think that's fair. If it's under 15%, you probably play him. He just got another favorable matchup. He continues to be Stafford's favorite target on the Rams, so I think you still have to consider him even at this high price. If you watch Scotty's Sneaky Stacks video, sneakily, the Falcons are a good play this week. Washington just isn't the same defense that they were last year. And when teams have played against Washington, wide receivers have been targeted 88 times through the first 3 weeks, which trails just the Bucs by a few targets for leading the league. Their defense, like I mentioned, just isn't great. If Matt Ryan can finally get this season going for the Falcons, I think Calvin Ridley is going to be a big recipient of that, and we can see a big game out of him finally. On to some more value plays. Guy I really like this week, Corey Davis. If you've been watching our channel, I love me some revenge games, and here's one right here. Corey Davis returning to New York. The Titans, on New York, returning to Tennessee. The Titans have given up the second most yards per reception so far this year, and without Jamison Crowder, he again questionable. Elijah Moore also questionable. Either one of those guys could play, but just without Jamison Crowder through 3 weeks, this is the guy who's seen most of the targets. So if that happens again, if either one of those guys are out, I'm going to be playing a lot of Davis. Even if James Crowder and Elijah Moore are in, I think Davis should still see 7 to 10 targets, and if he catches 5 of those, I think that's a pretty solid game against a team like I just mentioned, Tennessee, who allows very high yards per reception. Jalen Waddle on my Miami Dolphins at 4,900 has been a pleasant surprise. 13 targets last week with Jacoby Brissett in the pocket. That was obviously a huge game for him, and it's just been ramping up since week 1. I thought the addition of Will Fuller would bring that down a bit, but it doesn't seem to be the case. So the Colts have great outside corners. The Dolphins are going to have to go towards the middle to beat them, and I think that's where Jalen Waddle in the slot fits in real well. Another position that we're going to want to be aware of is just anyone on the Giants who's playing. Their whole team's basically questionable right now. Galladay, Shepard, Slayton, Evan Ingram isn't questionable. These 3 guys are questionable. If any 1 or 2 of them don't play, I think you play, at least one of these other guys between Galladay, Shepard, Slayton, or Evan Ingram. It doesn't look. I think Shepard is the most in danger of not playing. As you can see, he didn't practice on Thursday. If that's the case, playing Galladay all day. If Galladay and Shepard are out, I think you can consider Kadarius Toney, or you play Evan Ingram. So just be checking the injury status of that team. I think that's going to open up some real value. And the last dirt cheap guy I want to talk about before we move on to the tight ends is Quez Watkins. On the Eagles, he obviously at this price he's going to carry low ownership. He's just such a big play guy against a Kansas City team that has allowed 5 passing plays over 40 yards so far, which it leads the league. He's been on the field for 66% of offensive snaps last week. As you can see, he's capable of these big 91, 41-yard plays. So at 3,500, if you get 2 catches out of him, like this week, 2 catches for 117 yards, I mean, he's paying off in great fashion. And obviously, 91 yards, a 91-yard play, you're expecting him to get in the end zone. So I think that's definitely a play. Over to tight ends to close this out. I talked about TJ Hawkinson a little already, but against Chicago, just whenever Detroit plays, there's 2 guys you have to consider, Hawkinson and Swift, and especially against Chicago, where their defense isn't as good as it was last year. Their offense is definitely not as good as it has been in the past. I don't know, this might be the worst offense I've ever seen for a Bears offense, but Hawkinson, you definitely have to consider him. The Bears are giving up 13.3 yards per reception, which is tied second, I believe, in the league. And Hawkinson can easily catch the ball 8 to 10 times a game, and that's just great value. Noah Fant at 4,300 since Judy has gone down, and has just been a staple in this Broncos offense, even with only 3 targets last week. Again, we talked about it's against the Jets. It's just hard to play guys when they're playing the Jets, but should be a much more competitive game this week. Obviously, don't have Judy, he's on IR, but now they're down KJ Hamler also. Noah Fant's a guy who's on the field between 90 and 100% of snaps. And the Ravens are leading the league, allowing 7.3 receptions to tight ends through 3 weeks. So I think it's a guy that Denver's going to want to target throughout the game, and a guy that Baltimore won't be able to cover, as they haven't covered tight ends much this season. And then a couple value options. This goes back to A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. But Anthony Firkser at 3,100 for the Titans. If both of those guys are out, this is kind of the veteran on the team, right? He was on the team last year, would step in when Jonnu Smith was out, and would have very good weeks. was a full participant in practice this week. Hasn't played the last 2 weeks, but I think, again, if Jones and A.J. Brown are out, Furster's a guy that Tannehill's going to be looking at a lot if Derrick Henry doesn't put them up by 4 touchdowns in the first quarter. Last but not least, Jack Doyle, questionable, but I think he'll play. He was sidelined at Thursday's practice, so again, keep your eye out on him. But at 2,700 against the Dolphins, I talked about the Dolphins have shut down cornerbacks. Normally don't give up big games to opposing wide receivers, so I think the way to beat them is to run the ball, hence why I like Jonathan Taylor, and to pass to the middle from slot receivers or tight ends, and I think that's where Jack Doyle comes into play. So yeah, if Jack Doyle does suit up this week, I think we should put him in our player pool for 2,700. He's a good punt option at tight end. You can see he's got a very low ceiling, very low floor, but a very high ceiling. So just kind of wait and see how he goes. If he doesn't play, Mo Alley Cox, another kind of, I wouldn't call him a staple, but a guy that has definitely stepped into his role on the Colts and been able to put up decent numbers and get in the end zone. So that'll do it. Stay tuned, or subscribe, and we'll be coming out with more Week 4 content. We've got our full slate breakdown with Scotty and I coming out later this week. Scotty's Sneaky Stacks of the Week came out yesterday, so be sure to check that out. And follow us on Twitter at HandsDownDFS, and just kind of stay tuned for all the updates throughout Week 4, and we'll also be releasing our Hands Down Week 4 official lineup. Thank you guys for watching, and catch you guys next time.